a really, really fascinating article is up today on 1 Peter 5 called Pope Francis, How Much Lower Can We Sink? And it has been authored by the author of The Dictator Pope, Henry Sire, and it effectually functions as an update on that excellent book that we got those many years ago, 7 years ago by my count. Excellent, excellent book by all measures and by all accounts. Very well-researched book by Henry Sire, who originally published the books anonymously. And let me tell you, the article up on 1 Peter 5 is a banger. It's a bombshell. Really, really important as a it doesn't demonstrate this heresy or that heresy by Pope Francis. I think Rules for Retrogrades has done that especially effectively over the last few months, October, November, December. But it does show the character of Francis and his fundamentally political nature. I don't mean in the Aristotelian sense. We're all fundamentally political human beings because we must live one with the other. To live alone, as Aristotle said, one must be either a beast or a god. It's not what I'm talking about. I mean, in the pejorative sense, Francis is a fundamentally politically motivated man. And I'm going to just go through and paragraph by paragraph read you this excellent article up on 1 Peter 5 by Henry Sire. Henry Sire himself says, look, this is sort of like a 7 years later update on the book Dictator Pope. Lots of stuff I didn't know even when I researched and wrote the book. Really important for all the young Catholics who have come in the church in the last 7 years. I interact with a lot of you on Twitter who simply don't know the backstory on Francis. They don't know how much water is under that bridge. How much lower can we sink? This is the text of a talk given to Latin Mass Society in London about 3 weeks ago. And you can actually, if you go to 1 Peter 5, the audio of Mr. Sire's talk can be heard. Here's how he begins. When Joseph Shaw, another good Catholic in similar space to us, when Joseph Shaw proposed this talk to me in early September, I suggested the title, Pope Francis, How Much Lower Can We Sink? But the fact is that since then we have been overtaken by events, namely the Synod on Synodality and all its skullduggery. That's my little addendum. Over the past 11 years, we have all seen Pope Francis's pontificate in a trajectory of accelerating descent into more and more overt betrayal of Catholic doctrine, pretty linearly, and maybe it's a descent. But I must say I did not foresee the Gadarene rush we have seen just within the last 3 months. Synod, a little before it, a little after it. If we want to access the very grave events that are happening around us, we need to try and understand the man we are now looking at sitting on the throne of Peter. So before I comment on recent developments, I would like to add some details to the picture of Pope Francis, which I gave in my book, The Dictator Pope, which was first published 6 years ago. Sorry, I thought it was 2016. It's 2017. That book's full title, under the pen name initially, Marcantonio Colonna, which is a cool historical figure to look into, was The Dictator Pope, The Inside Story of the Francis Papacy. Here's the background for those newbies, a lot of young-based America First kids that have come into the church in the last 2-3 years are like, what's so bad about Francis? You caught him in a little lull in the middle of COVID, even though he was saying bad stuff during COVID. You caught him in a lull in his outright attack on doctrine. Yeah, he said bad stuff about it and about the Maxine, but that's not really doctrine. And so you guys haven't seen a lot of what's really gone on. Here's Sire. To give you some background on this book, I should explain that I arrived to work in Rome in April 2013, less than a month after the election of Pope Francis, and I lived there for the next 4 years. I was working for the Order of Malta, an organization which has close links to the Holy See, and I quickly began to hear the reports that were privately coming out of the Vatican. They showed a very different Francis from the genial liberal figure who was being presented by the world's media. Insiders were saying that as soon as the publicity cameras were off him, Francis became a different figure. Arrogant, dismissive of people, given to foul language, which does make it onto the record sometimes. Remember, coprophagia, coprophilia? The Pope taught you those words. And notorious for furious outbursts of temper, which were known even to the Vatican chauffeurs. Over the next couple of years, I continued to hear inside information. For example, from the late Cardinal Pell about the internal politics involved in the two synods on the family in October 2014 and October 2015. Tons of trickery being spearheaded by the leader, Francis. Let us bear in mind that in his first years, Pope Francis had barely shown his hand, different from now, for those who actually know what they're talking about. And the people assumed he was the liberal reformer that the church supposedly needed. Early in 2016, I wrote an article for Angelico Press titled, Pope Francis, Where is the Reformer Behind the Media Idol? I was beginning to think that somebody needed to write a book disclosing the gulf between the public image of Francis and the reality as seen within the Vatican. But at that stage, I did not think that I would be the one to write it. Besides the information gulf I have described early in the pontificate, there was another one stemming from the language barrier. There was, in fact, a great deal of information which had been available for years about Jorge Bergoglio and his career in Argentina, but it simply had not come through to the rest of the world because it had not been translated into English. Since I am half Spanish, writes Sire, this was another of the factors that pointed to my shouldering the task that was needed. Him not only researching the book or pointing out the need for the book, but penning it himself. When I decided to start work on the book, the first thing I did was to make a trip to Argentina, which I did in March 2017, to speak to people who could tell me about Bergoglio's past record. This was the information that had been sadly lacking to the cardinals when they elected Bergoglio in 2013. So why'd they elect him? This is something that comes up time and again in the Roman Catholic Church. You'll hear the J2P2s, you know, the people that just, they love John Paul II. He's the only pope ever who should be called Pope St. John Paul II. You never hear them say that about Pius X. A far better man, a far better pope. People go call him Pius X. The people that love him call him Pius X. He's a saint. You only hear Pope St. John Paul II because they're insecure. They know what a below mediocre Pope JP2 was. But think about it. The cardinals are always falling on this excuse without vetting a pope or a fellow cardinal. They'll talk about, we didn't have the information. We just voted for this guy for the most important position, Pontifex Maximus, the bridge between heaven and earth, and we just assumed he was good. Why? We don't know. That's weird. Okay? And I don't fully buy it anyway, but at the very best, it's what we call negligence plus in torts law. We call that recklessness. To vote someone to being Pontifex Maximus because just their name was on the ballot. And you're like, I don't know. How you vote for a local municipal proposition, a special referendum on the ballot. You're like, I don't know this one. I just filled out yes. Don't do that for Pope. Okay? You guys are fed well, you cardinals, and you have basically two jobs. One of them is electing popes. You get to be fed well and take as much time as you need to go find the right guy that the Holy Spirit's directing you toward. Don't vote for a guy you don't know. It's a similar thing, but slightly more understandable in the second case to the following. All of JP2's bad episcopal and cardinalate appointments. Dude, take a little time. There are only a few thousand bishops in the world. Take a little time. Do your research. You don't have that. It's a very important job, world's most important job, but he's not being worked to the bone 70 hours a week like an immigrant baker in New York, Lochner versus City of New York. You have time. You can do whatever you want. Make some delegations to other people and make sure you get the right bishops and cardinals in place. I'm sick of the excuse. It doesn't work in other jobs in the workplace, right? if you're safety inspector and the machine flies apart and kills a bunch of people, you can't be like, well, you know, I trusted these grunts that work below me. They said it was pretty good. It's like, you got to be on them, man. Okay, so there's lacking information to the Cardinals in 2013. I don't buy it. And a lot of people don't besides, but I continue with Sire's letter. In particular, there was a very revealing book which had been written shortly after the papal election, but unlike the dictator pope a couple years later, which had been quickly stamped on and had since become almost unavailable. In 2013, people were idolatrous about Francis. Catholics always run into this papalatry in the mainstream, aside from Pope Benedict. But even the left-wing secular press around the world was idolatrous. They knew he was one of them, not one of us. And they loved him for it. So this first book got stamped on and became unavailable immediately from the first year. The title was El Verdadero Francisco, The Real Francis, by Omar Bello. The author was a public relations executive who had known Bergoglio personally over the past 8 years, having worked for him in a television channel run by the Archdiocese of Buenos Aires. As a professional in the field of public relations, Bello was quick to recognize in Bergoglio a master in self-promotion, which is absolutely true. The only man better at burnishing and self-procuring and, self-primping his own legacy than LeBron James in the world is similar-minded Pope Francis. Men of the left, one of them's a lot smarter than the other, but men of the left who are obsessed with cultivating an image that will sell. To do, I think, untoward things with. He also described a man who was accomplished in the covert exercise of power and manipulation of people. This author in this 2013 book on Francis, the first one that was really effective at telling all about Francis, but which was stamped on and silenced and essentially fell into obscurity, says Sire. For example, Bello tells us in his book 2 stories which were already well known in Buenos Aires. Neither of these are completely shocking, but they do tell you he's not a nice guy. One was the way in which Bergoglio took a dislike to a member of the archiepiscopal staff, Mr. Felix Bottazzi, and decided to sack him without showing his hand. This tells you, at least partly, why does Francis do all of the promotion of Skittles and Transformers and then not take credit for it later? Pope slanders will say, okay, if he's really working to legitimize Skittles and Transformers, why did he say, they act like they can't understand it. Why does he say that Skittles and Transformers can be from the devil and they're demonic and violate? Yes, he says those things from time to time. But you know what else he does? He literally pushes the agenda harder than anyone in the secular world. He literally makes doctrinal chief, if he can, the most pro-Skittles Transformers bishop in the church, Heiner Wilmer. Vote with your feet, not with your mouth. Actions speak louder than words. Show us, don't tell us. Pick your cliche. It's part of who Francis is. He'll hate a guy and sack him, but then be really nice to him. Listen to the story. It proves to you he's capable of this kind of two-facedness. This is the word you don't hear very often. Francis is very two-faced, even though he's one-minded. He's a single-minded, Sankt Gallen, strong leftist, bent upon who knows what, basically destroying the church doctrinally. But he's two-faced in order to accomplish his one goal.